institutions. So it creates a lot of disharmony, it creates a lot of imbalance, and it weakens institutions, and therefore the way that human diversity and our celebration and our respect towards our fellow human beings is related to SDG 16 is through these aspects of treating diversity or treating differences as unequal, rather than trying to understand these differences, how they have arisen, and what can we do with these various kinds of differences that there are. We are revealed, and we make ourselves revealed, make ourselves known to one another by the diversity of our looks, gender, language, culture, values. So these are this is where the diversity arises from, and we reveal ourselves as a member of these diverse set of the constellation of these various characteristics, and we also get to know other people who belong to other sets of characteristics. One of the first steps in the celebration of our diversity is recognizing the fact that there is a common thread to all of humanity. All of humanity is really a heritage. To understand that this is really the first step in the celebration of diversity. We need to recognize and respectfully recognize our differences. And these differences actually inform our cultures, our values, our minds, and all our ways of being in the world. So it's extremely crucial for us to be respectful and in our recognition of these differences. And all these kinds of differences are actually the chief informant of the creative life force. And it's really the central reality in our understanding and stewardship of it. So we need to understand that the information that we gain by studying diversity actually creates the life force. We need to understand this diversity, generate knowledge, and knowledge is the key to tolerance. There is a lot of intolerance in the world right now. There's a lot of intolerance in India right now. And I'm not going to actually expand on what kind of intolerance that we see in India right now, and none of it is really palatable. None of it, of this kind of intolerance is to be upheld. And that a large amount of that stems from lack of knowledge or our lack of endeavor to scientifically generate this kind of knowledge that pertains to our various types of diversity that we have. But this knowledge provides a new perspective on the lives of others around us, as well as around the world. So it's not just around us, but we also get to know through this information how people live in other parts of the world and why they need to be respected, what can we learn from them, etc. So it really provides a new perspective. It helps understand others' perspectives. Not only we get our perspectives, but also helps the others to know our perspectives, to broaden our views, and fully experience and educate ourselves. So that's the power of knowledge, and like I said, and I like to actually underscore that this knowledge is the key to tolerance. It helps understand and learn to appreciate other cultures and other ways of life. So it helps to understand that we are not the only ones in the world. There are other people with other kinds of beliefs and cultures, and we need to actually appreciate that. So we need to really recognize diversity as a heritage of humanity. As soon as we recognize, as soon as we learn to appreciate that this is a heritage, and this is a heritage, diversity is a heritage, and this heritage is all of humanity, it's a heritage of humanity, we will strive to be respectful, we'll strive to generate data, we'll strive to understand how this diversity has arisen, and we eventually will become more knowledgeable, more powerful in the right sense of the word. Power essentially means our ability to understand others, and therefore knowledge of this kind of diversity actually helps understand others and provides us with enormous amount of power. And this power should be channelized to promote peace, harmony, reduce injustice, and build stronger institutions. So those are the kinds of things that diversity means to us, and diversity, as I said, actually means difference. And this difference means that it's not fallen from the heavens. It belongs to us, and we are a part of this diversity. And the reason why we want to celebrate this diversity is that it helps to unite and to educate us. Provided that we are willing to learn, study of diversity actually helps unite us and also to educate us. It's crucial to personal growth and community growth. It's not just personal growth, but also helps communities grow, communities understand. So today is a chance to find out more about what we have in common rather than what separates us. So that's what the basic tenet of my talk will be. We will try to understand this diversity as a heritage of humanity. We will try to understand from where this diversity has arisen, and we will try to understand that this is commonality rather than trying to propagate this as differences. Instead of propagating this as differences, try and understand this and propagate the unity that there is in this diversity. And I will make one more statement about and I'll show you a picture of the person that I'm talking about. I grew up in an institution called the Indian Statistical Institute, not too far away from here. And the motto of the Indian Statistical Institute was unity in diversity. And this motto comes not just, it's not the brainchild. The motto is not the brainchild of our founder, Prashant Chandra Mahalanobis, but actually it is contained in the scriptures that there is unity in diversity, and that's where I have grown up. I have grown up in the milieu of understanding diversity, appreciating diversity, and recognizing that there is unity in diversity. So what I'm going to do for the remaining half hour or so is essentially to talk about diversity, anchor diversity, the kind of diversity that we see in India, and also give you a sort of a very brief 3-minute historical flavor as to how these kinds of diversity studies have arisen in India. Initially, it arose with understanding physical body dimensions. Subsequently, it graduated to understanding genomic differences and understanding more at the molecular level, and then eventually what came out of all of these studies, what kind of inferences have been drawn from these studies. So the questions and the inferences is essentially what I wish to tell you and inform you about. So like I said, that we are going to anchor ourselves in India, but not remain confined to India. We are going to talk about Asia, maybe even the world, depending on the amount of time that I have left. So this kind of work, which is essentially work on understanding human diversity, arose in the mid-1930s. And the kind of work that started at that time was looking at diversity in body dimensions, physical dimensions, and it was spearheaded essentially by physical anthropologists or people who were interested in study of diversity through these various body dimensions, etc. This is from about the mid-1930s, there was systematic studies started, but even prior to that, the British bureaucrats, and one of them needs to be remembered, Herbert Risley, turn of the century, he actually measured a very large number of people from all parts of India, essentially measuring heights, weights, and certain other physical dimensions of the body. Again, his main contention was to quantify diversity, was to try and understand how much of diversity is there in these physical dimensions of the people of India. So he had actually published many of those raw data, and they were later analyzed by Prashant Chandra Mahalanobis and his team of people, and they came to certain kinds of conclusions, which was more descriptive in terms of the amount of difference, but Risley was not actually trying to answer any basic questions about human population groups in India. The questions about human population groups of India came from Prashant Chandra Mahalanobis and a physical anthropologist of that time. His name was D.N. Majumdar, and he is the two of them together asked a few questions, and then they went ahead and did some seminal surveys to answer those specific kinds of questions. The other person who actually influenced these studies came much later, but had a lot of influence among those of us who were interested in these kinds of studies, was J.B.S. Haldane. J.B.S. Haldane was born in England, but subsequently renounced his British citizenship and became an Indian citizen, had joined the Indian Statistical Institute, and was a mighty force in initiation of these various human diversity studies in India, more at the molecular, more at the genetic level, which was preceded by the body dimension levels by Prashant Chandra Mahalanobis. What kind of questions did they ask? So these are the kinds of questions that they asked. For example, we already know that there are many different tribal communities, many different caste populations in India. The caste populations are arranged in certain hierarchy: upper caste, middle caste, lower caste, and so on and so forth. One of the questions that they asked is, if a member of a caste population and members of a tribal population live in close geographical proximity, are they more similar to each other than two members of the same caste community who live in geographically distant places? In other words, does geographical proximity overpower the ethnic constellations that we see in terms of caste? So geographical proximity, does it mean that over a period of time, does it actually result in shrinking of diversity than people who belong to the same social group but remain in very distant places? So they sought out to generate data and answer this particular question. Is there close correspondence between the social status of a caste group and its resemblance to the Brahmins? So as I just mentioned to you that the caste populations are arranged in some social hierarchy, the Brahmins being at the top. And the question that they asked is, do we find a gradation in terms of the affinity of these various social hierarchically arranged social groups with that of the Brahmins, meaning that as socially they go farther and farther away from the Brahmins, meaning from the lower caste, upper caste to the middle caste to the lower caste, do we also find a corresponding increase in the distance as measured by physical body dimensions, etc.? So that's the kind of question that they asked. Can we infer the origins of a population from anthropometric measurements? Anthropometric measurements are body measurements, physical dimensions, and do such inferences agree with historical knowledge? So many people, many anthropologists, social anthropologists, historians, they made some speculations about the origins of these various communities in India. And what Mahalanobis and D.N. Majumdar sought out to ask is that if we try and make these inferences through body dimensions, physical dimensions, biological material, then do we find that there is a correspondence between the historical inferences and the inferences that you make from physical dimensions or from biology? So I'm not going to get into the details. He did two major studies. One was anchored in the United Provinces. United Provinces in the mid-1930s comprised what's now Uttar Pradesh, Uttarakhand, and that particular region. And later in the 1940s, and that's spilled over to late 1950s, early 1960s as well in Bengal, and that was undivided Bengal, East Bengal and West Bengal combined. So they studied a large number of population groups and tried to ask these kinds of questions. From the study that they made in the United Provinces, one of the things that they found out was that there is a close correspondence between social status and resemblance to the Brahmins. So as the hierarchy, caste hierarchy goes more distant in terms of socially more distance from the Brahmins, there is also an increase in physical dimensions or increase in distance based on physical dimensions. They also tried to ask this question, the last question: can we infer the origins of a population and how do, based on physical dimensions, and how do that compare based on historical knowledge? And the conclusion that they had is there are a number of cases in which physical evidence definitely indicates possible origins contrary to accepted opinion. So not always was there a correspondence between what was understood in terms of historical or social evidence, and that did not correspond very well with physical evidence. He was acutely aware that there is a lot of strife based on these kinds of connotations that we give, such as upper caste, lower caste, and so on and so forth. So he was very acutely aware of the ethical aspects of these kinds of usage, and so in the UP anthropometric survey and also later in the Bengal anthropometric survey, they called these populations as just groups. So we adopted a neutral word, group, and they actually defined a group. A group consists of individuals belonging to the same caste, religion, or tribe, and living in the same district. So that's how they defined a group. And these are very important because today you talk about, there is a lot of, you must have heard the acronym EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And all of this stems from these kinds of, ethical dilemmas that are associated with the terminology that we use in designating various kinds of populations, and it needs to be neutral so that there is no negative ethical connotation to usage of those kinds of language, and they were already acutely aware of this in the 1940s. The Bengal Anthropometric Survey, the report was published in 1945. It took about 5 years for them to do the survey, 4 years for them to do the survey. It started in 1941, and the report was published in 1945. P.C. Mahalanobis, as you can see, is no longer an author on this particular study. C.R. Rao, his disciple, and now the world's most famous living statistician, he is 101 years old, was the director of the Indian Statistical Institute for a very long time, a disciple of Mahalanobis, and D.N. Majumdar, about whom I told you, a physical anthropologist. The two of them teamed up to do the major work of collection of data and analysis of data, and Mahalanobis has gone to the background. Although he writes the foreword to this major report, it's about a 400-page report of the Bengal Anthropometric Survey. Mahalanobis wrote the foreword of this, but essentially he's taken the back seat in the conduct of this Bengal Anthropometric Survey. One of the important contributions is the demonstration of regional differences within a social group. Remember, they're asking the question that if you live in geographical proximity, are you more similar than if you live in geographical than if you're living in distant geographical locations? So one of the important contributions is the demonstration of regional differences within a social group, that is, between individuals adopting the same caste, tribal, or religious name but living in different areas. So if you move away from your original place of habitat to another place, you become physically distant, and this distance is essentially measured by a whole series of body dimensions, and that led to the formation of or the invention of the D-squared statistic, which is one reason why Prashant Chandra Mahalanobis's name is on the annals of statistical science. He was very famous for inventing this measure called D-squared statistic. It's called the Mahalanobis D-squared, very, very widely used. So he also concludes, because from the Bengal Anthropometric Survey, that a term like Brahmins of Bengal has to be used with some caution, because Brahmins in different places are not really one group. They can be more dissimilar to each other than a tribal group and a Brahmin group living in the same geographical location. Another interesting feature is that sometimes there is closer resemblance between caste groups within a district than between individuals of the same caste group belonging to two different districts. So again, geographical distance plays a major role in shaping physical dimensions. Mahalanobis, in his foreword, essentially lamented the fact that the conclusions that they had arrived at based on the UP Anthropometric Survey and the Bengal Anthropometric Survey were really not very strong, were really not very firm conclusions. And he said that anthropometry alone cannot tell the tale. We have to supplement it by other physical, genetic, and serological data. Serological is essentially blood groups and those kinds of stuff. The reason why he said this is that physical dimensions are greatly influenced by the environment, such as the diet that you eat, such as the temperature, etc., of the location where you live. So he felt that in order to be able to answer these questions, draw inferences about the origins of people, etc., one needs biologically more stable parameters, and those come in the form of blood groups. Whatever blood group you are born with remains the same throughout your life, irrespective of the location where you live. Same with various other genetic traits. So he felt that genes need to be invoked in order to understand the origins and the kinds of questions about relationships of population groups, and that will be answered much better if you dealt with genetic and more stable biological parameters as opposed to physical and body dimensions. Our experience with anthropometry has not been convincing, and blood group variations also need to be taken into account. So in the Bengal Anthropometric Survey, on a subset of individuals, they looked at blood groups, and again, the point was blood group, ABO blood group they looked at, and ABO blood group was just one genetic system. You need a multidimensional genetic construct to be able to reconstruct population affinities, population relationships, population origins. Just one genetic system does not do it, because it's it's not strong enough data to draw on the to draw such inferences on the basis of one particular blood group. So they concluded that we need to study more blood groups, such as the MNS blood group, such as the RH blood group, etc., in addition to the ABO system. They did not obviously include these in the major surveys that they undertook, but the Indian Statistical Institute, Prashant Chandra Mahalanobis, essentially graduated to initiate a major genetic laboratory in the Indian Statistical Institute, essentially to look at genomic diversity, genetic diversity at that time of the various population groups of India. I'll skip this slide, essentially, except to tell you, I'm not going to tell you the names of these are all very famous people, but let me save time by not telling you about these people. But the Anthropometry and Human Genetics Unit was set up in the Indian Statistical Institute. The Anthropometry unit was already there. Human genetics was an appendage, because the lessons from these surveys was that you needed more genetic parameters, and later the Anthropometry and Human Genetics Unit bifurcated into a separate human genetic unit, when much more work had started to be done in human genetics, and then a separate biological anthropology unit. So all of the work, so I'll give you a conclusion, all of the work that people have done in the world based on genomic data, trying to understand affinities, trying to understand relationships among population groups, their origins, etc., led to the conclusion, and this is enshrined in one of the UNESCO declarations, that this is called the Universal Declaration on the Human Genome and Human Rights. This says that there is a fundamental genomic unity of all of humankind, and that bolsters the UNESCO's call to respect and promote the practice of solidarity towards individuals, families, and population groups. So again, very, very directly tied to SDGs 13, the Sustainable Development Goal, to promote various peace, harmony, and build strong institutions, etc. I will spend the next few minutes essentially trying to reconstruct human evolution, human origins. Modern humans, we evolved in Africa about 200,000 years ago. And this is again borne out by multiple kinds of studies, including studies of ancient DNA, studies of DNA isolated from fossil remains of modern humans. We evolved in Africa about 200,000 years ago. We were small groups of people, we were, hunter-gatherers, and as our population expanded, there was pressure on natural resources, so eventually we came out of Africa. We were also intelligent people, and we wanted to explore around us, and we came out of Africa perhaps about 100,000 years ago. Now, when I provide you with these dates have a large standard error, so 200,000 could mean anywhere between 150,000 to 220,000, say, and 100,000 may mean anywhere between 80,000 and 120,000. So I'm giving you point estimates of these dates, but they are really, it's an interval. After we came out of Africa, we started to migrate, we started to explore different places, and we explored the entire, we now occupy every nook and corner of the world. One of the first places that we came from after we migrated out of Africa was India, and therefore India holds a prime place in the study of human evolution. Indian population groups hold a prime place in the study of human evolution. We came out, and when we came out of Africa, we saw that we were not alone, in the sense that even though we were modern humans, there were human-like creatures that were human-like animals that were roaming around in Europe. And one of these was called Neanderthal. There were a large number of Neanderthals walking the streets of Europe at that time when we came out of Africa to explore Europe. And there was another species that was called Denisovans, and the existence of the Denisovans, the number of Denisovans is small because we haven't found them in large numbers, but we know that there are distinct species from the Neanderthals. They were found in a cave in Siberia, and from a finger bone, DNA was isolated, and it was clearly a different genetic material than that contained in the Neanderthal genome. Today we know that Neanderthals don't exist, Denisovans don't exist, so what may we have done to them? First of all, we were a larger number of people, so we may have outnumbered them and killed all of them. But did we really kill all of them? How do we know whether we killed all of them? So again, genetic studies help, and using genetic studies, this is what has been estimated, that the Neanderthals and the Denisovans actually contributed their genomes to us. And how do they contribute? They contribute by mating. When there is admixture, when there is mating between individuals and they procreate, the child, whoever is born, went with the humans rather than with the Neanderthals. So over a period of time, through these repeated crossings of Neanderthals and humans, or Denisovans and humans, with the children going with the human population group, the population size of the Neanderthals and Denisovans declined, and they essentially became extinct. So we didn't actually kill them. And again, this is a series of studies that will take me a long time to describe. Based on these series of studies, this is what we know, that they made love, not war. They didn't exterminate each other. We also know of the existence of a potential unknown human. So it essentially means that the DNA evidence showed that aside from the Neanderthals and the Denisovans, there was also some other species that were roaming around in the plains of Europe. And what that species was, we never know, because we actually haven't been able to identify an ancestral DNA from that unknown species. But the reason why I'm pointing this out is that our work in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands actually has also bolstered this. Around the turn of the century, we began to work in various parts of India, including the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, again essentially to reconstruct the origins of the people of India. And we published this, and essentially all that I will show you is we looked at Jarwas and the Onges and the other Andaman tribal populations, and again there also we found that there was evidence of an unknown hominin. So essentially there was evidence of something, some pieces of DNA that weren't actually traced back to any of the species that we know, so like the Denisovans or the Neanderthals, etc. Then around the same time, another group of people who were looking at tribal populations in Melanesia, they came to the same conclusion. We still don't know whether the unknown hominin of the Andamanese and that we found in the Andamanese and the ones that was found in Malaysia were belong to the same unknown hominin. We haven't compared the DNA sequences because these people who worked in Melanesia, they have not released the data yet. If they release their raw DNA data, we can easily compare and find out whether we are talking about the same hominin species, but we don't know that yet. So all that we are trying to say is that including in India, including in Andaman and Nicobar Islands, there is plenty of evidence that there are unknown species that led that had interacted with the modern humans, whose DNA also impacted on the DNA of the modern humans, and these unknown hominins still need to be identified and deciphered. As we were doing this study, we not only wanted to look at India, we wanted to place India in the context of Asia, and because as I said, that one of the first places that modern humans came when they moved out of Africa was into India, we wanted to place this in the context of Asia, and essentially we teamed up with scientists from various parts of Asia, including various countries in Southeast Asia, Japan, China, and so on and so forth. Again, I'm not going to explain this to you, except to say that this is called a phylogenetic tree. These are the names of the populations that we looked at. Again, names don't matter; they come from various countries. This is the root of the tree. This is the most ancient portion. These are the most ancient populations, this is actually an African population, which is of course the most ancient because we evolved in Africa and we came out of Africa. What I really want to show you is a few more branches of this tree, and these are this is the oldest. This is like the root of the tree, and these are like the newest populations that evolved more recently. And what I want to show you is that India, populations of India root themselves here, which means that populations of India are some of the most ancient populations of the world. And there is an early divergence, and this is Africa. So soon after African populations diverged, Indian populations arose, and we belong to some of the oldest, most ancient human populations in the world. We looked at northern populations and eastern populations, and these are populations of South India. So essentially, again, North and East India and South India have different ancestral compositions. We looked at this in a far greater detail, but to get into that, I should tell you about the ethnic composition of India. There are tribal populations, caste populations, and religious and migrant groups, as I've already alluded to. The tribal populations, there are about 450 tribal populations in India, including subcastes. There are about 4,000 caste populations. These are not our estimates, but these are estimates done by the Anthropological Survey of India, and there are about 150 religious and migrant groups. These populations speak languages that belong to different language groups, and they have various kinds of social hierarchy and carry out different kinds of social occupations. If it hasn't struck you, Austroasiatic language of speech in India is spoken exclusively by the tribals. Neither the caste populations nor the other groups speak languages that belong to the Austroasiatic language family. And who are these kinds of tribals who speak Austroasiatic languages? These are like the Santals, the Mundas, etc. So those are the populations that speak Austroasiatic languages. So, like I said, that this work that we did with the various scientists in Southeast Asia and other parts of Asia led to this work that we initiated using 405 loci, 405 genetic markers, and again, this is the essentially the phylogenetic tree of these populations that we reconstruct based on data on these 405 loci. All that I want to point out is that this is color coded by language, and all that you can see is that people who speak similar languages group themselves together. So all of the blues are these are the Dravidian populations in brown, etc. So by and large, there is grouping by language, but I must also remind you that there is a confounding between language speaking populations of India and their geographical location of habitat. Most of the populations of North India speak languages that belong to the Indo-European family. Most of the populations in South India speak languages that belong to the Dravidian family. So when there is a separation between the Indo-European and Dravidian, you are not only separating the populations by language, but actually separating the language by separating the population groups by geography as well. So this confounding needs to be borne in mind. we then, this was using 405 loci. Technology was improving and our ability to access these technologies was improving. The National Institute of Biomedical Genomics was already formed, and we had high throughput sequencers over there, and we were able to sequence the whole human genomes at that time. So we felt that instead of looking at 400 loci, why don't we look at whole genome sequences? So we embarked on an ambitious project to sequence 100,000 genomes from populations of Asia, and this is the result of that particular study. We hadn't reached the 100,000 genomes mark, but this is an interim marker paper that we published, and this was done by a consortium of scientists, again, from various parts of the world. These are the population groups of India that were included in this particular study, several various population groups of India. We assayed their genomes in one of two ways. We looked at 100 million markers on their genomes, or we sequenced them, and we sequenced them. Based on these various kinds of data, what we find is that among population groups of India, the extent of Neanderthal admixture varies, is about 2 to 3%. The extent of Denisovan admixture, you remember the the Denisovans and the Neanderthals that I had already talked to you about, the extent of Denisovan admixture was like 0.5%. There is more Neanderthal admixture in the Indian genomes than Denisovan genomes. We also looked at the hierarchy and the way that these are structured, and what we find is that if you look at the percent of Denisovan ancestry, the amount of Denisovan ancestry is the highest among the tribal populations of India, and as we move from the tribals to the middle caste to the upper caste, the extent of Denisovan admixture goes down. So there is a gradation between the extent of Denisovan admixture and the social hierarchy of the Indian population groups. One of the last questions that we asked is, okay, these population groups in India group themselves by language or by geography, and hence they have different ancestral origins. How many different kinds of ancestral origins can we find among the people of India? So in other words, how many distinct ancestral types can we find? How many footfalls of different ancestral types have there been in India? And again, this question was, this is not a new question, that was originally asked by us, but several of us asked this question, and we were actually beaten in some way by a group from Harvard Medical School and CCMB in Hyderabad. They published this work, and essentially what they said is that there are two ancestral footfalls of two kinds, one that corresponds to the North Indian population groups and the other that corresponds to the South Indian population groups. So they identified two different ancestral types in this particular work. We realized that their sampling of populations was very restricted, and they did not even sample any population from the northeast of India. Populations in northeast of India speak languages that belong to the Tibeto-Burman family. So we felt that this particular inference that there were only two ancestral types in India was probably limited in its inference. So we looked at our data, and essentially, let me explain this figure to you, this color-coded figure. Essentially, on the x-axis, you have various individuals, and there are hundreds of individuals. As a matter of fact, thousands of individuals. And this scaling is from 0 to 1. What are we measuring in the genome of these individuals, in the genomes of these individuals? The question that we're asking is this genome pristine? In other words, is there no mixture in these genomes? In which case, we will have, for example, a vertical line which is completely green, essentially meaning that it is a pristine genome in the sense that without any admixture. On the other hand, if you come here, so these individuals have genomes, this is color-coded, these individuals have genomes that belong to 4 different types. So we can identify 4 different types in the genomes of many of these individuals, each of whom is represented by a little dot on the x-axis, and the vertical line explains the kind of admixture in their genomes. So essentially what we find among the people of India, and this represents the people of India, is that there are 4 different ancestral types. And can we identify what these 4 different ancestral types are by looking at the language that they speak, the place that they stay, etc. They meaning these individuals here, where do they stay? These red individuals, where are they predominantly from? The green individuals, I'm using the word red and green in a frivolous sense, but where are they coming from, etc. And if you look at that, what we find is that essentially they group by language. Indo-European, Dravidian, Austroasiatic, and Tibeto-Burman. Tibeto-Burmans are in the northeast. They are predominantly in the northeast. The Austroasiatic populations are predominantly tribal populations. And as you can see, that's the sky blue. That's their genome, but their genomes are also admixed by genomes of the Dravidians, Indo-Europeans, and Tibeto-Burmans. And these are the Dravidian populations of South India. Also with some admixture, but not very much of admixture. These are almost pristine genomes, and also the Indo-Europeans. So there is admixture of these 4 ancestral types. So our work led to the inference that there are 4 major ancestral types, and we are now from here, from this discussion, excluding the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, people from the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. They represent a 5th ancestral lineage, which is probably the most ancient lineage after humankind came out of Africa. And these are the lineages in the ancestral lineages in mainland India, and there are 4. And most of our genomes are actually admixed between these various kinds of ancestral genomes, but there are some that are almost pristine, especially as you can see in the northeast. There is much less admixture compared to the other parts of India. We published this in PNAS. This work that we did, and I'm coming to the last 2 slides, I won't even spend any time on this. The work that we did, this kind of work, understanding human diversity, also informs us about predispositions to diseases, responses to drugs, interactions with environmental factors, propensity to infections, and progression of diseases. So various kinds of information can be gleaned from the work from the genomic data that you assimilate, that you generate, and in addition to informing us about our origins, about how proximal an individual is to another individual, etc., it also tells us about various other kinds of things that we're interested in. Today, I do not have the time to touch upon any of these, but the data that we generated in the Genome Asia 100K project actually provided us with much useful information that has actually been published in the pages of Nature, but I will not get into this. So I come to my last slide, which I think is my most important slide. And I know that you can read English, but I'm going to read it out for you or along with you. And this is what I will. This is a passage from the African American poet Maya Angelou, and this is what she had to say about diversity, etc. It is time for the preachers, the rabbis, the priests and pundits, and the professors to believe in the awesome wonder of diversity so that they can teach those who follow them. It's time for parents to teach young people early on that in diversity there is beauty and there is strength. We all should know that diversity makes for a rich tapestry, and we must understand that all the threads of the tapestry are equal in value, no matter their color, equal in importance, no matter their texture. And this is essentially, this understanding and respect for diversity is a key to sustaining peace, justice, and strong institutions. Thank you very much for your attention. Pleasure for me.
Thank you so much, sir, for the mesmerizing talk, as usual. So it was great to time travel through the landscape of human diversity, touching the landscape of genomics, ethnicity, and geography with your talk. So we end this academic session over here, and we request all the delegates to move towards the e-Yuva Center for the inaugural session, and the students are requested to be seated over here. Thank you. an arrangement for tea has been made outside, so the students can go and have tea over there and come back to the auditorium within 15 minutes. Thank you. Those who are yet to do the registration, you can complete the process within this time and join us over here.